I don't know if you noticed the painting over there. I was going to bring it up in front, but decided you don't touch those paintings because Barb gets right. But Barb Overholt painted all these, and this is the one of Moses about ready to break the commandments as he sees down in the valley the golden calf. Now, let me see if you recognize this story. Slammed doors, fear, anger, yelling, confusion, frustration. That's how their relationship began. Just so you know, it's not about Dylan and me. Okay, just want to make sure that's clear. And then she found herself in a desperate situation, surrounded by hungry, growling wolves, certain to be killed by their sharp teeth. Then he came, saving her from certain death, risking his own life, chasing the fierce canines away. But now these two, the rescuee and the rescuer, had to live together. They had to learn to get along. They had to understand each other's idiosyncrasies, flaws, weaknesses, their ugly qualities, and their inner beauty. There had to be a mutual understanding, a common set of rules to follow. The two would have to get along or there'd be no peace, and life would be miserable. Anybody know what we're talking about?
Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast. I share with this story as a way of looking at the relationship between Israel and God. God had saved the Israelites from years of brutal slavery in Egypt. God parted the sea, drowned the approaching wolves, better known as the Egyptian army. God then led the Israelites with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. But now, the Israelites and God find themselves in the desert, a great expanse of wilderness. God's provided water for them and manna from heaven. But like Belle and the Beast, in Beauty and the Beast, the two needed to learn how to get along and live together. So, like the Beast does in the movie, God invites the Hebrew people to dinner. It's not really dinner, but it's a meeting, a very special meeting. Not as romantic, maybe, as the ballroom dance scene in Beauty and the Beast, but it's an encounter that the Israelite people wouldn't soon forget. God tells the people to wash their clothes and comb their hair, get ready, for God was coming down from the mountain to meet with them. But he also warned them not to touch the mountain, for the mountain was set apart as holy. And that all brings us to the text for this morning, with a powerful message. A message that has the potential to change our lives, our relationships with others, our work as a church, if we can get beyond the obvious. Now, maybe I'm setting the bar a little too high, but listen. We all know the story of the golden calf. If you didn't, you should, because I just read it, right? Pay attention. The Hebrew word for calf is eagle. E-G-E-L, which means male calf. So it'd be fair to say that today's sermon is about a lot of bull. Okay, that's the last joke. And that's just the problem. We know about the bull, how Moses has been up the mountain for some time, and the people are convinced that he might never come back. And now they convince Aaron, Moses' brother, to make them a god that they can hang on to. And so Aaron calls for the people to bring their jewelry, melts it down, and fashions it into a golden calf. Now, if we had read further in chapter 32, we'd find out that when Moses actually gets down from the mountain with 2 tablets containing the 10 commandments from God, sees the people having a great big worship service. Well, actually, it wasn't a worship service. It's described as a raucous party celebrating this new God. And in anger, he breaks the tablets. Then he takes the golden calf, burns it, grinds it down to powder, scatters it in the water, and then makes the Israelites drink it. And it only gets worse from there. Well, in sermons, probably in Sunday school, most of us have focused on the calf, the golden calf, and the faithless, wicked people who worship it. We've been warned that we must make choices ourselves about whether we will follow the one true God or false gods that are all around us. As a matter of fact, initially that was what I was going to preach on this morning. Trouble is, as I dug deeper, I discovered that, and I got this from the internet, just so you know. I discovered the story is not only about that. It may seem to be about this little golden bull that Aaron makes and the people worship, but the bull is only a bit player in a much bigger story. You see, the terrible thing in the story is not only what's going down in the camp, but one of the terrible things in the story is what's going up on the mountain. You see, way up there in the lofty heights where Moses is meeting with God, three incredible things, three incredible provocative things take place. First of all, God calls it quits. He's had it with the Hebrews. No matter how faithfully he is to them, they are faithless in return. They're a bunch of rebellious, stubborn, selfish, sin-loving people, and God has had it up to here with them. In fact, you know how ticked off God is when he looks at Moses and says, "Go down at once. Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely." You know how that is when sometimes you come home at the end of a long day and there's your wife or husband standing in the doorway waiting for you, hands on their hip, shaking their finger, and before you can get a word out of your mouth, "Wait until I tell you what your son did today." Trust me, I've heard it. More than once. You've probably heard it. We've all heard it at one time or another. And you see, God is so mad he can hardly spit. Actually, I don't know. Can God spit? If he could, he's so mad that he probably would. He won't even admit that he's related to these people. And so God makes a decision. Hey, it's 3 strikes and you're out, right? He's been patient long enough. He's going to destroy the rebellious Israelites. And so he says to Moses, in effect, "Hey, man, I'll save you and keep the promises I made to you to build into a great nation, but not these folks. They're sinners to the core. As far as I'm concerned, they're history." You see, the terrible thing is not with the golden calf down in the camp, but up on the mountain where God has called it quits. God's going to save Moses, but he's going to blow those idol worshipers off the face of the earth. And then high atop the mountain, the second amazing thing happens. Moses, in maybe one of the most dramatic moments in the Bible, talks to God. He says, "Don't do it." And then he reminds God that there was a sacred covenant that God established. And it's not just with Moses as an individual, but with all the descendants of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. Points out to God that Egypt and the rest of the world will laugh at God if, after promising to save his people, he ends up wiping them out. Moses argues that it's not enough for God to save only one individual. Salvation, as God promised it to Abraham, cannot be just for one. It must be for all. You see the incredible stand that Moses takes? Why, he actually refuses God's offer to save him, God's offer to fulfill the promise to him and him alone. And in fact, Moses is saying, "I'm not going anywhere without them." And now the story reveals a third amazing fact. Scripture tells us that God changes his mind. Now, whether or not God really changed his mind or God was all along trying to lead Moses in a kind of rabbinical process of learning, I'll leave that to smarter theologians than I. What's more important, though, is the central message. You see, we live in a time and an age where it's tempting to divide the world into us and them, winners and losers, the righteous and the unrighteous. It's not hard to look around and see people walking far away from God, worshiping golden calves of every description. Matter of fact, all of us have a golden calf to one degree or another. And isn't it equally as tempting for us to want God to blow up all those who aren't like us, to execute God's judgment on that person who hurt us, on that group that lives differently, on the person that's committed a crime, or the nation that practices genocide, or that other political party that has ruined America, on the people who make movies that celebrate violence, on those who seem to be living far apart from God and care nothing for God's ways. It's tempting for us to want God to save us and to give us the kingdom, but quit on them. But this morning, I want to tell you that question was answered a long, long time ago, high on a mountaintop, somewhere in the Sinai desert. God considered calling it quits on the faithless, those who go after golden calves, but God decided not to do it. Instead, that day, God gave birth to a new kind of person of faith. For in that moment, Moses became the first example of how God's people are called to live in the midst of a world that worships the golden calf. You see, God's people are people who live with the attitude, not without them. I know about a place in Berkeley that caters to runaways. There's a number of places. But this is a fantastic facility that doesn't judge these young people, but gives them a roof over their head, food to eat, and a way to break out of their dismal situation. And it works because many of the volunteers who give up their time to reach out to these who are considered the throwaways. See, I hold these people up to you as an example of how God wants His people to live. For in a day of throwaway kids, when it's tempting to think of some as good apples to be preserved and others as bad apples to be discarded, these faithful folks are embracing this population of at-risk young people and saying, not without them. Or right in our own backyard, where a group of people, kind of like Delenn, are involved in a program called Kairos, where they go out into the prisons and work with inmates society has long tried to forget. But these committed Christians reply, not without them. Then there's Mother Teresa, who lived among the poor of Calcutta. Is it enough for God to save only saintly nuns while the poor are left to languish? Like Moses, Mother Teresa loudly declared, not without the poor. That's why Sister Helen Prigine advocated for the life of Matthew Poncelet and others on Louisiana's death row. Her book was called Dead Man Walking, but her message was the same as that of Moses in what he said to those people in the camp who were condemned to die. Not without them. So here we are, people loved by God, and yet we are people who live in a world where we regularly practice giving up on people. Some of those given up people are in our own families. Some of those given up people are our enemies, upon whom we would love God to execute judgment and vengeance. Some of those given up people are persons who practice different lifestyles, persons maybe even addicted to drugs or caught up in destructive behaviors, persons whose lives have inflicted terrible injury on others. Some of those given up on people are persons whose lives have been so affected by poverty, injustice, abuse, and hopelessness that it seems that they will never become well. And we can go ahead and join the rest of the world in quitting on these people, or we can take to heart the heroic words whispered long ago, high on the mountaintop in Sinai, don't do it, God. Don't give up on them. This morning, I hope that we, too, can believe in a salvation larger than just ourselves. And I hope we will be able to make a commitment to connect ourselves in love to those who the world has given up on. For if we are to be a people dedicated to serving the needs of God, we must become a church whose living message is the very message of Jesus on the cross. Father, not without them. Amen.